The Messerschmitt filled every inch of Lieutenant Tom Brennan's windscreen. Time slowed to a crawl the way it does when your brain knows death is coming and wants to catalog every final detail. Tom saw the muzzle flashes first. 4 bright points of light erupting from the German fighter's nose like stars being born in the darkness. Then came the sound. Not the sharp crack you hear in movies, but a deeper percussion. Metal striking metal at 400 miles per hour. The kind of sound that vibrates through your chest cavity and makes your teeth ache. The first shell punched through the number 3 engine cowling. Tom watched the steel skin peel back like paper, watched orange flame bloom inside the nacelle, watched black smoke begin its terrible spiral. The second shell shattered his windscreen. Safety glass exploded inward, 1,000 crystalline fragments catching the October sunlight. The third shell missed his head by 8 inches. He felt the pressure wave as it passed, felt the air itself recoil from the violence. Through the smoke and shattered glass, Tom glimpsed the German pilot's face, just for a heartbeat, just long enough to see that he was young, maybe 25 or 30, long enough to see the concentration in his eyes, long enough to know that this man, this stranger had just killed him. Then the Messerschmitt flashed past, gone in an instant, consumed by speed in the immense sky over Germany. Tom's hands moved on the controls, pure muscle memory. His conscious mind was still processing what had happened, but his hands knew. Feather the damaged engine, transfer fuel from the compromised tank, check the instruments through the spiderweb cracks in the remaining glass. Engine temperature climbing into the red. Oil pressure dropping, fire warning light blazing like an accusation. His co-pilot, Danny Kowalski, was shouting something. Tom couldn't hear the words over the roar of wind, through the broken windscreen, over the scream of tortured metal, over the pounding of his own heart. But he could see Danny's face, could read the terror there. The same terror Tom felt coiling in his own gut. This was his 24th mission. One more and he would go home. Home to Cleveland, Ohio. Home to Sarah, his wife, who wrote him letters that smelled like her perfume. Home to Margaret, his daughter, who was now 10 months old. A baby girl he had never held, never seen except in photographs, never heard laugh or cry or say his name. Everything Tom Brennan loved in this world existed 5,000 miles away, in a small house on a quiet street, waiting for him to survive just one more mission. And now, at 23,000 feet over the ball, bearing factories of Schweinfurt, Germany, he was about to die without ever meeting his own daughter. But this is not a story about dying. This is a story about living. About mercy shown at 400 miles per hour. About enemies who became brothers. About coffee and chocolate in the values that endure when the weapons finally fall silent. This is the story of the day that changed everything. October 14th, 1943, Black Thursday, the deadliest air battle in the history of the 8th Air Force. And the day 2 men, 2 mechanics turned warriors collided in a moment that would define both their lives. Stay with us. Dawn came slowly to East Anglia that October morning. Fog clung to the ground like something alive, something that didn't want to release its hold on the long concrete runways. Tom Brennan stood beside his aircraft in the pre-dawn darkness, his breath turning to frost in the cold air, and performed the ritual he had performed 23 times before. He checked his oxygen mask, tested the seal against his face, made sure the hose connections were tight. One man in his training class had passed out at altitude when his mask failed, came to at 8,000 feet in a power dive pulled out just above the tree line. The fear of that moment, the instructor said, never left him. So Tom checked, and checked again, and then checked a third time because 24 was a dangerous number, and he needed every advantage luck and discipline could provide. The aircraft beside him was a Boeing B-17F Flying Fortress, serial number 42-313-2, a 30-ton machine of aluminum and rivets and hope. Tom had named her Sarah's Promise. The name was painted on her nose in white letters along with a small painting of a woman holding a baby. The artist, a gunner from another crew who wouldn't survive the war, had captured Sarah's smile perfectly. The baby in her arms was Margaret, though the artist had never seen her. He had painted from Tom's description and from the photograph Tom carried in the breast pocket of his flight suit. That photograph was there now. Tom could feel it against his chest. A talisman, a reminder of why he climbed into this metal beast mission after mission and flew into skies filled with flak and fighters. You checking that mask a fourth time, or you satisfied? Tom turned. Danny Kowalski stood there grinning, despite the cold, despite the fear they both felt and never spoke about. Danny was from Brooklyn, a neighborhood kid who talked fast and joked faster, who hid everything he felt behind wisecrack remarks and nervous energy. Just making sure, Tom said. You always make sure. You made sure yesterday, you'll make sure tomorrow. Danny's grin faltered, assuming there is a tomorrow. Tom looked at his co-pilot, his friend. There will be. Yeah. Danny lit a cigarette, his hands cupped around the match flame. Yeah, there better be. One more after this and you're done. Then I gotta break in some new pilot who doesn't know a throttle from a rudder pedal. You'll manage. Sure, but I liked having a pilot who used to build the damn things. Made me feel safer, like you understood the bird. Tom did understand the bird. Before the war, before the uniform, and the wings on his chest, he had been a mechanic at the Ford plant in Cleveland. Assembly line work. He knew engines, knew how pistons fired and valves opened, and fuel mixed with air to create the controlled explosions that turned propellers and kept 30 tons of aluminum flying. That knowledge had kept him alive through 23 missions. That knowledge and luck. Mostly luck. The rest of the crew was gathering now. James Chen, the bombardier, a Chinese-American from San Francisco, who never talked about what it was like to fight for a country that had put his cousins in internment camps. Bobby Hayes, the navigator, a farm kid from Texas who could plot a course through clouds and flak with nothing but a compass and a watch and some kind of instinct Tom didn't fully understand. Mike Sullivan, the radio operator, an Irish kid from Boston who sent half his pay home to his mother and 6 younger siblings. And the gunners, 5 men whose names Tom knew, whose families he had memorized from the letters they wrote home, whose chances of survival were somehow even worse than his own. Ball turret gunner, tail gunner, waist gunners, top turret, each position a steel bubble in the sky exposed to cannon fire and cold, and the absolute certainty that if your aircraft went down, your ability to bail out depended entirely on which part of the plane was on fire. Briefing in 10, Tom said. Stay sharp. They filed into the operations building, into the room where mission briefings happened, where intelligence officers pulled back curtains to reveal maps with red lines drawn across them. Target lines, routes in, routes out, each one a prayer wrapped in planning. The room smelled of coffee and cigarette smoke, and the particular kind of fear that men try to hide when they know what's coming. 200 airmen packed into a space meant for half that number. Pilots and co-pilots and navigators and bombardiers, the officers, the men who had to make decisions when everything went wrong. Colonel Harris stood at the front. He was older, maybe 40, and his face had the worn quality of a man who sent young men to die and had to live with it afterwards. Gentlemen, the room fell silent. The target for today is Schweinfurt. A murmur ran through the crowd. Schweinfurt. The word itself sounded harsh, Germanic, unforgiving. For those who weren't with us in August, Schweinfurt is in northern Bavaria, deep inside Germany, beyond the range of our current fighter escort. Colonel Harris paused, let that sink in. The target is the ball-bearing factories. Intelligence estimates they produce nearly 60% of Germany's ball-bearing supply. Ball bearings for tanks, for aircraft, for submarines, for every piece of machinery the Reich uses to wage war. Destroy these factories and we cripple German industry for months. Bobby Hayes, sitting next to Tom, leaned over and whispered, cripple Germany or get ourselves killed trying. Tom said nothing. He was studying the map. The red line stretched from their base in England, across the English Channel, across Belgium, deep into the heart of Germany. 600 miles, 3 hours in German airspace, 3 hours during which their P-47 Thunderbolt escorts would run out of fuel and turn back, leaving the bombers alone. P-47S will escort you to the German border, Colonel Harris continued. Approximately here. He pointed to a spot on the map that suddenly seemed very far from the target. After that, you're on your own until the return leg, when fresh escorts will meet you. Someone in the back asked the question everyone was thinking. How long without escorts, sir? Approximately 3 hours. The room absorbed this in silence. 3 hours. In August, they had tried a similar mission. 60 bombers never came back. 600 men, most dead, some captured. Some lost forever, their aircraft gone down in the North Sea or crashed in German forests where no one would ever find them. I know what you're thinking, Colonel Harris said. His voice was steady, but Tom could hear the weight in it. I know August was hard, but this target is vital. The intelligence community believes that if we can knock out Schweinfurt, we shorten the war by months, maybe more. Your sacrifice here saves lives on the ground, saves lives in the Pacific, brings all of us home sooner. Tom glanced at the photograph of Sarah and Margaret painted on the briefing room wall, part of a mural some artist had painted of all the crew's nose art. Sarah's smile looked back at him. Margaret's tiny face. One more mission. We launch at 0700, Colonel Harris said. Weather is marginal but acceptable. Questions? No one spoke. What was there to ask? They all knew the mission. They all knew the odds. They all knew that some of them would not be standing in this room tomorrow morning. Dismissed. And gentlemen, Colonel Harris paused. Good hunting. 400 miles to the southeast in a Luftwaffe base outside Munich, another mechanic was preparing for the same battle. Hauptmann Kurt Richter walked the flight line in the gray October dawn, his boots crunching on gravel, his breath misting in the cold air. His Messerschmitt Bf 109 sat waiting on the hard stand, its angular lines and narrow fuselage giving it a predatory look even when motionless. Kurt had flown this particular aircraft for 6 months. He knew its quirks, knew that the number 2 cylinder ran hot and needed watching, knew that the left aileron stuck slightly when the temperature dropped below freezing, knew that this machine, like all machines, was a collection of compromises and problems held together by engineering and prayer. Before the war, Kurt had been an automotive mechanic in Essen. His father worked at the Krupp factory, a precision machinist who had taught Kurt to read blueprints and understand tolerances and appreciate the beauty of a well-designed engine. Kurt had fallen in love with American cars, Ford Model A's, the occasional Chevrolet that made its way to Germany. He loved their simplicity, their ruggedness, the way they were designed to be fixed by the farmer who owned them, rather than requiring a specialized mechanic with specialized tools. Now he killed the men who built those cars. 47 times Kurt had shot down Allied aircraft. 47 victories painted on the fuselage of his fighter in small silhouettes. British Spitfires over France. American B-17 SES over Germany. Each one representing a machine destroyed, a crew killed or captured. Each one a tally mark in a war Kurt no longer believed in but couldn't escape. Hauptmann. Kurt turned. It was Franz, his crew chief, an older man who had maintained aircraft since the Spanish Civil War. Franz's hands were permanently stained with oil and grease, the mark of a man who understood engines at some fundamental level. She's ready, Franz said, patting the Messerschmitt's fuselage. Ammunition loaded, fuel topped off. I checked the engine myself this morning. She'll fly true. Thank you, Franz. Be careful up there. Intelligence says the Americans are sending another big raid. Maybe 200 bombers, maybe more. Kurt nodded. He knew. The Luftwaffe knew every time the Americans launched a major mission. Radar stations along the coast picked up the formations as they assembled over England. Radio intercepts provided details. The element of surprise, at least on the strategic level, was gone. The question was never if the Americans were coming, only where and in what strength. Franz, Kurt said quietly, do you ever wonder what we're doing? The old mechanic looked at him for a long moment. Every day, Hauptmann. Every single day. Kurt touched the photograph he kept in his flight suit pocket. His sister Anna, 16 years old in the photograph, smiling alive. She had been killed in March of 1942 when an RAF bomber raid hit Essen. The bomb shelter she huddled in with their mother took a direct hit. Anna died. Their mother survived, but something in her had broken that night and never healed. Kurt had enlisted the next day. Not because he believed in the Nazi ideology. He had never joined the party, had never raised his arm in salute unless required. He enlisted because his sister was dead and someone had to pay for that. Someone had to answer for the fact that a 16-year-old girl who wanted to be a teacher would never teach anyone anything. 47 victories later, Kurt understood that no amount of killing would bring Anna back. Understood that the British pilot who dropped that bomb probably never knew his target was a civilian shelter. Probably went home and kissed his own sister. Probably never thought about the 16-year-old German girl whose future he erased in a single moment. War made monsters of everyone. The only question was whether you could find your humanity again when it ended. I should go, Kurt said. Briefing in 5 minutes. Franz nodded. Bring her back, Kurt, and bring yourself back too. I always do. Kurt walked toward the operations building, past other pilots preparing for the same mission. Some of them were boys 17 and 18 years old, rushed through training because Germany was running out of experienced pilots. They looked at Kurt with a mixture of awe and fear. He was an ace, 47 kills, a veteran of the Eastern Front who had survived Stalingrad. In their eyes, he was invincible. Kurt knew better. No one was invincible. You survived until you didn't. And with each mission, the odds caught up a little more. The briefing was short and efficient. American heavy bomber formation detected over the North Sea, estimated 300 aircraft, heading southeast. Projected target, Schweinfurt or Regensburg, all available fighters to intercept. Priority, destroy the bombers before they reach the target. Tactics, frontal attacks aim for the nose and cockpit where defensive armament is lightest. Kurt listened and understood what wasn't being said. 300 American bombers meant 3,000 American airmen. Young men like the pilots sitting in this room. Men with families and futures and photographs in their breast pockets. The Luftwaffe would kill as many as possible, and the ones they missed would drop their bombs and kill German workers in the factories below. War reduced everyone to mathematics. Tonnage of bombs versus tonnage of aircraft destroyed. Attrition rates. Acceptable losses. Nothing about it was acceptable. But Kurt would fly anyway, because orders were orders. Because Germany was his country, Nazi leadership or not. Because 47 victories meant 47 fewer bombers reaching German cities. 47 fewer loads of bombs falling on neighborhoods where 16-year-old girls huddled in shelters. Questions, the briefing officer asked. No one spoke. Good hunting, gentlemen. Tom climbed into Sarah's Promise through the belly hatch, pulling himself up into the aircraft with practiced efficiency. The interior smelled of oil and aluminum and the particular staleness of a machine that had been closed up overnight. He made his way forward to the cockpit, settling into the left seat, the pilot's seat. Danny took the right. Around them, the rest of the crew found their positions. James in the nose with his bomb sight. Bobby at his navigation table. Mike at the radio. The gunners checking their weapons, making sure the ammunition belts fed smoothly, making sure the guns could traverse their full range of motion. Tom ran through the pre-flight checklist. Fuel levels, oil pressure, hydraulics, electrical systems. Every switch, every gauge, every indicator had to be checked and verified. An aircraft was 1,000 ways and the only defense was discipline. At 0700 hours, the first engine coughed to life. Then the second, then the third and fourth. The sound built a roar that shook the aircraft and made conversation impossible. Tom advanced the throttles, felt Sarah's Promise strain against her brakes, felt the power in her engines. 30 tons of aluminum and steel and explosive ordnance, held in check by mechanical brakes and his foot pressure. The tower gave clearance. Tom released the brakes. The bomber rolled forward, picking up speed, the tail coming up as airspeed increased. At 90 miles per hour, Tom pulled back on the yoke and felt the aircraft leave the ground. Felt that moment when all the weight transferred from the wheels to the wings, when the miracle of lift took over and the impossible became routine. They climbed into the gray October sky, joining the stream of bombers, lifting off from bases all across East Anglia. The formation assembly took an hour. 291 aircraft arranging themselves into combat boxes, stacking high and low and middle, creating overlapping fields of defensive fire. On paper, the formation was designed to be impregnable. Each bomber bristled with 13 50 caliber machine guns. With nearly 4,000 guns in the formation, planners believed no fighter could survive an attack. The planners had never fought over Germany. At 0900 hours, the formation turned southeast, toward the English Channel, toward Belgium, toward Germany, toward Schweinfurt. Tom looked at the photograph taped to his instrument panel. Sarah smiling, Margaret in her arms. One more mission. Just one more. He had no way of knowing that 400 miles ahead, Kurt Richter was already in the air, already climbing toward the intercept point, already checking his ammunition count and fuel status, and preparing himself mentally for what came next. 2 mechanics, one American, one German, both flying toward the same point into the sky, both about to collide in a moment that would change everything. The P-47 Thunderbolts joined them over the channel, 50 Silver fighters taking up escort positions above and beside the bomber stream. Tom saw them and felt marginally safer. The Thunderbolts were good aircraft, tough and fast and heavily armed, but they had one fatal limitation: range. At 1100 hours somewhere over eastern Belgium, the Thunderbolt leader called on the radio. "Bingo fuel, we're turning back." "Good luck, fellas." Tom watched them go. Watched the fighters waggle their wings in farewell and peel away toward England, toward safety, toward home. The bombers flew on alone, and somewhere ahead, Kurt Richter's voice crackled over the radio to his squadron. "Contact, heavy bombers, Angels 25, prepare to engage." The sky was about to catch fire. The German border appeared below as a thin line of geography that meant everything. On one side, relative safety. On the other, 3 hours of naked vulnerability in the most dangerous airspace on Earth. Tom watched the altimeter, 23,000 feet. The air temperature at this altitude was 40 degrees below zero. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the windscreen. Each breath through the oxygen mask felt like inhaling knives. His hands, even inside heated gloves, ached with cold. Bobby Hayes, the navigator, had frostbite on 3 fingers from their last mission. The doctor said he might lose one. Bobby flew anyway. The bomber stream stretched for miles. 291 aircraft in tight formation, their contrails painting white lines across the October sky. Beautiful in a terrible way, like watching a funeral procession that you were part of. Danny Kowalski checked his watch. "Escorts are gone. We're alone now." Tom didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Everyone in the aircraft knew what came next. It was just a question when. 11:13. The Messerschmitts came out of the sun. Tom saw them as dark specks, at first high above the formation. Then the specks resolved into shapes: angular wings, narrow fuselages, the unmistakable silhouette of Bf-109s, 30 of them, maybe more, diving from altitude like birds of prey that had spotted wounded game. "Bandits!" The call came over the radio from the lead aircraft. 12 o'clock high. Tom's hands tightened on the controls. Beside him, Danny was already calling out positions. "I see them, coming in fast. Jesus, they're coming in fast." The Messerschmitts dove in formation, 4 aircraft wide line astern. Closing speed was over 500 miles per hour. They held their altitude until the last possible moment, then leveled off and opened fire at 300 yards. The first bomber died in seconds. Tom saw it happen. The B-17 was in the formation ahead of his, maybe 200 yards distant. The German fighters concentrated their fire on the nose where the plexiglass was thinnest. Cannon shells punched through the bombardier's position, through the navigator's station, through the cockpit. The aircraft didn't explode. It simply ceased to be a functioning machine. The nose section crumpled. The pilot slumped forward. The bomber fell out of formation in a lazy spiral, already dead, its momentum carrying it forward even as gravity claimed it. Tom counted 4 parachutes. There should have been 10. Then the fighters were on his formation. The sound was unlike anything in civilian life. The deep thump of cannon fire, the lighter rattle of machine guns, the scream of engines at full power, the metallic ring of bullets hitting aluminum. Sarah's Promise shuddered as German fighters flashed past, their guns blazing. Tom heard the top turret gunner firing back, heard the steady hammer of the 50 caliber guns, heard the empty brass casings rattling down into the aircraft. A Focke-Wulf 190 came from the right and attacking the formation from the flank. It was a different design than the Messerschmitt, shorter and more aggressive looking. Its pilot lined up on Sarah's Promise and opened fire. Time fractured into moments. A line of holes appeared in the right wing. Just appeared, as if someone had taken a hole punch to sheet metal. Tom felt the aircraft lurch, felt the controls go mushy in his hands, saw the number 308 engine begin trailing smoke. "Number 3's hit," Danny shouted. "I see it." Tom's voice was calmer than he felt. "Watch the temperature. If it goes into the red, we'll feather it." Another fighter made a pass, this one from slightly below, coming up at an angle. More holes appeared in the fuselage. Mike Sullivan, the radio operator, called out that they had damage in the radio room, but he was okay, not hit, just scared. Welcome to the club, Tom thought. The air battle became chaos. Fighters swarming the bomber formation from every angle, tracers cutting through the sky like deadly geometry, aircraft falling, men dying, the radio filled with calls, Mayday, going down, bailout, the desperate mathematics of survival playing out at 200 miles per hour. Tom fought to keep Sarah's promise in formation. The aircraft wanted to pull right the damaged wing, creating asymmetric lift. He trimmed the controls, added left rudder, muscled the yoke. Flying became a full-body effort. Every minute at the controls burned calories he couldn't spare and focused attention he needed for watching the fighters. A B-17 200 yards to the left took a direct hit to the bomb bay. The aircraft didn't fall. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, 10 men inside fighting to survive. The next moment it was a fireball, an expanding sphere of orange flame and black smoke and debris spinning away in all directions. The explosion was so violent that Tom felt the pressure wave rock Sarah's promise, felt the heat on his face through the broken windscreen. No parachutes. The formation tightened, the surviving bombers pulling closer together. Tighter formation meant better defensive fire, but also meant less room to maneuver when fighters attacked. It was a calculated risk. Everything in war was a calculated risk, calculated by people who weren't the ones dying. Kurt Richter made his first pass at 11:17. He dove from 28,000 feet, the sun at his back, his Messerschmitt responding to every input with the precision of a well-built machine. His wingman held formation beside him, 2 more fighters behind, a standard attack element. They had practiced this 1,000 times. Now they would do it for real again. Kurt's target was a B-17 in the high squadron. He couldn't see the name painted on his nose, couldn't see the men inside. At this distance, at this speed, the bomber was just a target, a collection of vulnerabilities wrapped in aluminum. Aim for the nose. Fire at 300 yards. Pull up and away before the defensive fire could track you. Simple, clean, deadly. Kurt armed his guns. 4 20mm cannons, 60 rounds each. Every shell the size of a man's thumb. Every shell capable of tearing through aluminum and flesh and bone as if they were paper. 300 yards. Kurt pressed the firing button. The Messerschmitt shuddered as all 4 cannons fired in sequence. He saw his tracers arc toward the bomber. Saw the shells impact. Saw the plexiglass nose shatter. Saw the bomber's guns continue firing, the turret gunner refusing to die quietly. Then Kurt was past, pulling up hard, 6G forces crushing him into his seat vision, narrowing, blood draining from his head. He fought to stay conscious, fought to maintain control, climbed back to altitude for another pass. Below and behind the bomber he had just attacked was falling out of formation. Not dead yet, damaged, trailing smoke, losing altitude. The kind of aircraft that would become a straggler. The kind of aircraft that would die slowly over the next hour as more fighters found it alone and vulnerable. Kurt tried not to think about the men inside. The battle raged for 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt like hours. 20 minutes during which the sky became a graveyard and men fell like rain. Tom lost count of how many fighters made passes at his formation, lost count of how many bombers fell. His world narrowed to the instruments in front of him, to Danny's voice calling out fighter positions, to the constant adjustments needed to keep the damaged aircraft flying straight. The number 3 engine temperature climbed past the red line. Tom feathered the propeller, stopping its rotation, cutting fuel to the engine. Sarah's promise now flew on 3 engines. Her performance degraded. Her fuel consumption increased. "Can we make it back on 3?" Danny asked. "We'll find out." At 11:40, the German fighters broke off the attack. Not because they were defeated, because they were out of ammunition and low on fuel. They dove away toward their bases, leaving the bomber formation alone for the moment. Tom took stock. His formation had launched with 12 aircraft. 9 remained. 3 gone in 20 minutes. 30 men. Some would have survived, would be prisoners now or trying to evade. But most were dead. Most had died in fire and violence at 20,000 feet, far from home, far from anyone who loved them. The radio crackled. "All aircraft, this is lead. Continue to target. I say again, continue to target. We drop these bombs." Tom looked at the fuel gauges, looked at the temperature on the remaining engines, looked at the holes in his wing, and thought about the men he had just watched die. Then he looked at the photograph taped to his instrument panel. Sarah holding Margaret. Come home to us. Continuing to target, Tom said into the radio. Beside him, Danny nodded. One more mission. Just one more. Schweinfurt appeared on the horizon at 1425, a city of 40,000 people surrounded by farmland bisected by the main river. From 23,000 feet, it looked peaceful, a collection of buildings and streets and church spires. Hard to believe that down there in those buildings was the machinery that kept German tanks rolling and German aircraft flying. Hard to believe that Tom was about to try to destroy it. The bomber stream had lost 18 aircraft so far, 180 men. But the survivors pressed on, driven by duty and fear, and the knowledge that turning back meant facing court-martial, or worse, facing themselves in the mirror every morning for the rest of their lives. The flak began at 1430. Tom saw the black puffs appear in the sky ahead, seemingly random at first, then coalescing into a wall of explosions. 88mm anti-aircraft guns. The Germans had ringed Schweinfurt with them. Each gun could fire 15 rounds per minute. Each shell climbed to altitude and exploded in a sphere of shrapnel metal fragments, moving at thousands of feet per second, capable of shredding aluminum like tissue paper. The formation flew into the flak barrage. Sarah's promise rocked as a shell exploded 50 yards to the left. Tom felt the shrapnel hit the aircraft, felt the impacts like hail on a tin roof. More holes appeared in the fuselage. A fragment tore through the cockpit, missing Danny's head by inches, and embedded itself in the back wall. Danny stared at it, then at Tom. Close, was all he said. The flak grew worse as they approached the initial point, the spot where they would turn toward the target and begin the bomb run. The sky turned black with explosions. Tom flew through smoke so thick he lost sight of the aircraft ahead, emerged into clear air, dove back into smoke as another salvo erupted around them. A B-17 in the formation ahead took a direct hit. The shell exploded inside the aircraft somewhere near the radio room. The bomber's fuselage broke in half. The front section fell away in a tumble. The rear section followed, spinning men trapped inside or thrown clear, parachutes opening, in some cases not opening in others. IP in 30 seconds, Bobby called from the navigation station. Tom turned on to the heading Bobby gave him. The bomb run had begun. For the next 3 minutes, he could not deviate, could not take evasive action. Had to fly straight and level while James the Bombardier lined up the target in his Norden bomb site. 3 minutes during which Sarah's promise would be a stationary target in a sky full of flak. 3 minutes that would determine whether 30 men lived or died. The flak intensified. The Germans knew the bomber stream was on its approach run, knew they couldn't maneuver. Every gun in Schweinfurt fired at maximum rate. The barrage was so dense that Tom couldn't see how anything could survive it. Sarah's promise shuddered with impacts. A fragment tore through the No. 2 engine cowling. Another shattered a section of the windscreen that had somehow survived the earlier damage. The cold air roared through the cockpit with renewed fury. "Steady," James called from the Bombardier's position. "I need steady." Tom's hands were welded to the controls. Every instinct screamed to turn, to dive, to do anything except fly straight into the exploding sky. But he held course, held altitude, held the aircraft as steady as damaged systems and turbulent air would allow. "Steady, steady." James's voice was hypnotic, focused entirely on the crosshairs in his bomb sight, on the factories below, sliding into perfect alignment. Bombs away. Tom felt the aircraft lurch upward as 4,000 pounds of high explosive dropped from the bomb bay. Felt Sarah's promise, suddenly lighter, want to climb. He pushed the yoke forward, maintaining formation position. Around him, other bombers released their loads. The sky filled with falling bombs, thousands of pounds of ordnance, tumbling toward the ball-bearing factories that fed the German war machine. "Let's get out of here," Tom said, banking away from the target. Behind them, Schweinfurt began to burn. The relief of completing the bomb run lasted exactly 90 seconds. Then reality reasserted itself. Sarah's promise was damaged, badly damaged, and they still had to fly 350 miles back to England. Tom assessed the situation. No. 3 engine feathered. No. 2 running rough. No. 4 cylinder head temperature climbing toward the red line. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Fuel leaking from somewhere in the right wing. Multiple holes in the fuselage, some large enough to see through, and they were falling behind the formation. On 3 engines, 2 of which were compromised, Sarah's Promise couldn't maintain formation speed. Tom pushed the throttles to the stops, coaxing every bit of power from the remaining engines. But physics was unforgiving. The bomber fell back slowly, inevitably watching the formation pull away. "We're losing them," Danny said quietly. Tom knew. Without the protection of the formation's combined defensive firepower, they were vulnerable. A single bomber damaged and slow was exactly the kind of target German fighters hunted. Easy pickings, a guaranteed kill. "All aircraft, this is Sarah's Promise. We're down to 3 engines and falling behind." The lead pilot responded immediately. "Copy Sarah's Promise. Can you maintain formation?" Tom looked at the airspeed indicator. The formation was pulling away at 5 miles per hour. In 10 minutes, they would be alone. "Negative, we're too slow." "Understood. Good luck, Tom. We'll see you in England." The formation continued on, climbing slightly, pulling away with the inexorable logic of survival. Tom didn't blame them. The lead pilot's job was to bring as many aircraft home as possible. Slowing the entire formation to protect one damaged bomber would risk everyone. The mathematics of war were brutal, but clear. So, Danny said, his attempt at lightness falling flat, "It's just us now." Just us. Tom glanced at the fuel gauges again. At their current speed and rate of consumption, they might make it to England. Might. If the remaining engines held, if the fuel leak didn't worsen, if the hydraulics didn't fail completely, if a dozen other systems that were damaged but still functioning didn't choose the next hour to quit, if no more fighters found them. Behind them, Mike Sullivan called forward. "Tom, I'm getting reports on the radio. More fighters inbound, hunting stragglers." Of course they were. The second wave came 15 minutes later. Tom saw them first as specks against the clouds, materializing out of the pale October sky like sharks drawn to blood. 6 Messerschmitts, fresh from their bases, fully armed, looking for exactly what Tom was flying: a damaged bomber, a lone easy prey. "Fighter 6 o'clock level," called the tail gunner. Tom watched them in his mirrors. Watched them circle, assessing, choosing their angle of attack. Professional, patient. They had all the time in the world. The first pass came from behind and below. 2 fighters diving in together, their cannons opening fire at 400 yards. Tom saw the tracers arc toward him, saw them pass beneath the aircraft, heard the tail gunner's guns hammer back. The fighters pulled up and away, climbing for another pass. "Did we hit them?" Tom asked. "Negative, they're too fast." The second pass was more accurate. The fighters came from the right rear quarter, one high and one low. Their timing was perfect, forcing the gunners to split their attention. Cannon shells walked across Sarah's Promise's right wing, tearing new holes, severing control cables. Tom felt the aircraft lurch, felt the controls go slack in his hands. "We're losing hydraulics," Danny shouted. Tom fought the aircraft. Without hydraulic pressure, the control surfaces didn't respond properly. The ailerons were mushy. The rudder pedals felt like they were connected to nothing. He was flying on mechanical cable alone, backup systems never designed to handle a damaged 30-ton bomber. The number 2 engine, already running rough, chose that moment to quit completely. The cylinder head temperature spiked. Metal seized. The propeller windmilled for a moment, creating massive drag, then froze in place. "Feather 2, Tom ordered. Danny hit the controls. The propeller blades rotated to minimize drag. But the damage was done. Sarah's Promise now flew on 2 engines. 2 engines that were themselves damaged. 2 engines trying to push 30 tons of aluminum through hostile sky. They were falling, not rapidly, not in a death spiral, but steadily losing altitude. 15,000 feet, 14,000, 13,000. The ground that had seemed safely distant was rising to meet them. "Tom," Danny's voice was quiet, "we're not going to make it." Tom didn't answer. He was doing math in his head. Fuel consumption versus distance, rate of descent versus altitude, engine power versus weight. Every calculation came up the same way. Danny was right. Another fighter made a pass, then another. Each attack did more damage. Each attack pushed them closer to the moment when flight became impossible and falling became inevitable. At 12,000 feet, the number 4 engine caught fire. Tom saw the flames first as a flicker in the cowling, then as a steady burn, then as a roaring blaze that trailed behind the engine like a banner. The fire warning light on the instrument panel blazed red. Fire in number 4. I see it. Tom reached for the fire suppression controls, activated the system. Carbon dioxide flooded the engine compartment designed to smother the flames. The fire continued to burn. Fire system's not working, Danny said, his voice tight. Tom tried again. Nothing. The fire grew, fed by fuel and oil and the oxygen-rich airstream at 12,000 feet. The entire engine cowling was burning now. The flames were eating through the mounting bolts that held the engine to the wing. In minutes, maybe seconds, the engine would tear free. And when it did, it would take part of the wing with it. Tom reached for the bailout bell. This is it, he said. Everyone out. Now. He rang the bell twice. The signal that had been practiced but never executed. The signal that meant abandon aircraft. The signal that meant you were about to jump out of a burning bomber at 12,000 feet and trust your life to 28 feet of silk and nylon. Through the intercom, Tom heard the crew acknowledge. Heard them moving. Heard the bomb bay doors open as James and Bobby prepared to jump. Heard Mike Sullivan helping the wounded waist gunner toward the door. Go, Tom said to Danny. I'll hold her steady. Tom, we both need to. I know, I will, but somebody has to hold the controls or she'll spin. Go, I'll be right behind you. Danny looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, unstrapped, reached out and gripped Tom's shoulder once, turned and left the cockpit. Tom was alone. He held the controls with both hands, fighting to keep the bomber level while his crew jumped to safety. Fought the dying aircraft that wanted to roll, wanted to dive, wanted to give up the struggle against gravity and fire. Counted parachutes opening below. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The number 4 engine tore free. The sound was catastrophic. Metal shrieking, bolts shearing. The entire engine, 3,000 pounds of machinery and fire, ripped away from the wing and tumbled toward the earth. The wings, suddenly unbalanced, started to fold upward. Tom unbuckled, grabbed the photograph from the instrument panel. Sarah and Margaret, stuffed it into his breast pocket, stood, crawled toward the bomb bay against the G-forces as the aircraft entered a spin. The world rotated. Sky, ground, sky, ground. The centrifugal force pinned him against the fuselage wall. He pulled himself forward, inch by inch, hand over hand, reached the bomb bay, looked down through the opening at the spinning earth 6,000 feet below, and jumped. Falling was silent. After the roar of engines and the scream of wind through the broken windscreen, the relative quiet of free fall was surreal. Tom tumbled through space, watching the earth spin below him, watching Sarah's promise spiral away above him, watching his gloves freeze in the cold, thin air. He reached for the ripcord, found it, pulled. The parachute deployed with a violent jerk that nearly dislocated his shoulders. He felt the harness bite into his chest and thighs, felt himself decelerate from terminal velocity to something survivable. Looked up and saw the white canopy above him, full and round and beautiful. Then the lines twisted. Tom didn't see how it happened. Maybe turbulence from the dying bomber. Maybe bad luck. Maybe just the chaos of bailing out at high speed. But the parachute lines wrapped around each other, tangling, kinking. The canopy lost its shape, began to spin. Tom was falling too fast. He reached up, grabbed the lines, tried to untangle them. His gloved hands couldn't grip properly, couldn't separate the lines, couldn't stop the spin that was turning faster, tighter, pulling the canopy into a useless spiral of nylon. The ground rushed up at him. 5,000 feet. 4,000. He was falling at over 100 miles per hour, far too fast to survive impact. Tom fought the lines, twisted his body, tried to spin in the opposite direction to unwind the tangle. Nothing worked. The parachute streamed above him like a pennant, useless decorative, a cruel reminder of the salvation that was failing. 3,000 feet. He could see details now. Trees, fields, a road, the earth that would kill him in less than 30 seconds. Tom reached for his reserve chute, the small secondary parachute strapped to his chest, grabbed the handle, started to pull, and that's when he saw the Messerschmitt. Kurt Richter had been hunting stragglers for 20 minutes. His squadron had refueled and rearmed and returned to the fight looking for damaged bombers trying to limp home. It was brutal work but necessary. Every bomber that reached England meant another mission, meant more bombs falling on German cities, meant more deaths like Anna's. War was brutal. Victory required brutality in return. Kurt spotted the falling bomber from 5 miles away, saw it spiral down trailing smoke, saw the parachutes blossom below it, counted them. 10. The entire crew had survived the bailout. Standard procedure was clear. Eliminate enemy aircrew when possible. Parachuting airmen were helpless targets. One pass, one burst of gunfire. The men would die quickly, mercifully. Germany would face 10 fewer trained American flyers. 10 fewer enemies who might fly another mission, drop more bombs, kill more German civilians. Kurt dove toward the parachutes. He selected the last one, the one still descending rapidly. Saw immediately that something was wrong. The parachute was tangled, streaming uselessly. The man below was fighting the lines, trying to untangle them. Spinning, falling too fast. Kurt lined up his gun sight. His finger moved to the trigger. The airman was 300 yards away. 200. An easy shot. Kurt saw the American reach for his chest, saw him start to deploy the reserve chute, and something stopped Kurt's finger from completing its motion on the trigger. He saw the desperation in the American's movements, saw a man fighting for his life with the same determination Kurt would show, saw not an enemy, but a fellow human being falling toward the earth moments from death. Kurt thought of Anna, thought of her falling as the shelter collapsed, thought of her terror in those final moments, thought of how much he would have wanted someone, anyone, to help her. The American's reserve chute deployed. The small white canopy blossomed, slowing his descent. Not enough to prevent injury, but enough to save his life. The main chute, no longer under full load, began to untangle. Slowly, gradually. Both chutes working together. The American would survive. Kurt's finger remained motionless on the trigger. His radio crackled. "Richter, did you get him?" Kurt watched the American descend toward a forest, watched him fight for every second of control, watched him impossibly live. "Negative," Kurt said into his radio. "Target evaded into clouds. Ammunition depleted." Both statements were lies. The sky was clear. Kurt had 60 rounds remaining. But Kurt Richter, who had 47 victories and a dead sister and 3 years of killing behind him, couldn't pull the trigger. He pulled his fighter away and climbed toward altitude. Didn't look back. Didn't want to see whether the American made it to the ground safely. Didn't want to know. Because he had just violated his orders. Had just let an enemy pilot survive. Had just chosen mercy over duty for reasons he couldn't articulate and didn't fully understand. The war would continue without this one American. The mathematics of attrition wouldn't change. Kurt's decision wouldn't alter the outcome of anything. But the American would live. And 40 years later, that decision would change everything. Tom hit the ground harder than he expected. Both parachutes together slowed his descent enough to survive, but not enough to land gently. He struck earth in a German forest 20 miles south of Schweinfurt, his legs buckling, his body rolling through dead leaves and underbrush. Something in his chest cracked. Pain exploded through his ribcage, white and sharp and overwhelming. His ankle twisted beneath him, ligaments tearing. He lay there for a moment, gasping each breath, a knife blade between his ribs. Above him, through the canopy of October trees, he could see his parachutes tangled in the branches. White silk against brown leaves. A beacon for anyone searching. Tom forced himself to move. Broken ribs or not, sprained ankle or not, he had to get away from the landing site, had to hide the parachutes, had to become invisible before the German patrols found him. He stood, nearly collapsed, caught himself against a tree trunk. His ankle screamed protest but bore weight. Not broken then, just damaged. He could walk. He had to walk. The parachutes came down after 5 minutes of painful pulling and climbing. Tom bundled them together, found a depression in the forest floor, buried them under leaves and fallen branches. Not perfect camouflage, but it would have to do. Already he could hear dogs barking in the distance. The Wehrmacht was coming. Tom checked his escape kit. The small canvas bag every flyer carried contained the basics of survival behind enemy lines. Water purification tablets, a compass, a silk map of Europe printed on a handkerchief, German marks, a small first aid kit, and chocolate. 4 bars of Hershey's chocolate, each one wrapped in brown paper, each one representing concentrated calories and desperate comfort. He ate one bar immediately. The sugar hit his system like electricity. His hands stopped shaking. His mind cleared. The pain in his ribs remained, but became manageable, something to be endured rather than something that controlled him. The compass pointed west. France was 200 miles. Allied lines another 100 beyond that. 300 miles through occupied territory with broken ribs and a bad ankle and German patrols hunting him. Tom started walking. The first day was survival stripped to its essence. Move during daylight when he could see obstacles and paths. Rest when exhaustion made movement impossible. Avoid all roads, all farms, or signs of human habitation. Drink from streams, the water so cold it hurt his teeth. Navigate by compass and instinct through forests that had no trails and countryside that stretched endlessly in all directions. By nightfall, Tom had covered maybe 8 miles. His ribs throbbed with every step. His ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. He found a small ravine, crawled into it, covered himself with leaves for warmth. The October night was cold enough to see his breath, cold enough that sleep came in fragments broken by shivering and pain. He thought of Sarah, wondered if she had been notified yet, wondered what the telegram said. Missing in action. That terrible phrase that meant everything and nothing. Missing could mean captured, could mean evading, could mean dead in a forest with no one to find the body. Tom touched the photograph in his breast pocket. Still there, still dry. Sarah and Margaret smiling at him through the darkness. One more mission, he had thought. Just one more and I go home. Now he was 300 miles from safety, and every step was agony, and the Germans were hunting him with dogs and discipline. But he was alive. The German fighter pilot had let him live, had watched him fall with a tangled parachute, and hadn't fired. Tom didn't understand why, didn't understand mercy in the middle of war, but he was grateful for it with every painful breath. Day 2 brought rain and desperation. Tom woke to gray skies and cold drizzle that soaked through his flight suit within minutes. The leather jacket that had seemed so warm at altitude provided no protection against autumn rain. He shivered constantly. His teeth chattered. Hypothermia, he knew, would kill him faster than German patrols if he didn't find shelter. He found an abandoned barn around midday. The roof leaked, but it was better than open sky. Tom huddled in a corner, shaking, trying to generate warmth through muscle tension alone. His second chocolate bar tasted like salvation. He made it last, breaking off small pieces, letting each one melt slowly in his mouth. Through gaps in the barn walls, Tom watched a Wehrmacht patrol pass on the road below. Soldiers in field gray, their rifles slung their boots, splashing through puddles. They looked tired. They looked like men who wanted to be somewhere else. They looked, Tom realized, like him. Like any soldier in any army who had been fighting for too long. The patrol moved on. Tom waited another hour, making sure they were truly gone before continuing west. His ankle was worse. The swelling had turned purple. Each step felt like stepping on broken glass. Tom fashioned a crude splint from tree branches and strips torn from his parachute silk. It helped. Not much, but enough. By day 3, Tom was approaching delirium. He had eaten his third chocolate bar that morning. One remained. His water purification tablets were gone. He drank from streams without treating the water, knowing it might make him sick, but unable to stop himself. Thirst was more immediate than the threat of dysentery. The broken ribs made breathing difficult, made sleeping impossible except in brief, exhausted collapses, made every movement a negotiation between necessity and pain. Tom knew he was slowing down, knew his judgment was compromised, knew that soon, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, his body would simply quit and the Germans would find him unconscious or dead. That afternoon, he stumbled onto the wreckage of Sarah's Promise. He almost walked past it. The bomber had come down in a field, the impact scattered across half an acre. The tail section was recognizable. The wings had separated on impact. The nose, where James had aimed his bomb sight and Bobby had plotted courses, was surprisingly intact. Tom approached slowly, feeling like he was visiting a grave. This aircraft had been his home for 6 months. He knew every rivet, every patch, every quirk in her systems. And now she lay broken across German soil, empty and cold and finished. He found personal effects scattered in the wreckage. Danny's Brooklyn Dodgers cap stained with oil. Bobby's harmonica bent but not destroyed. Mike Sullivan's rosary beads, the chain broken, the crucifix missing. Tom gathered them carefully, knowing that someday if he survived, these small items would be the only proof that these men had existed, had flown, had fought. The sound of truck engines made him freeze. Wehrmacht recovery team. They were coming to examine the wreckage to salvage anything useful to document what had happened. Tom ran, ignoring the pain, ignoring the screaming in his ribs and ankle. Ran for the tree line 200 yards away. Made it with seconds to spare, diving into underbrush as the trucks arrived. He watched from hiding as German soldiers spread out around the wreckage. Watched them take photographs. Watched them poke through the debris with the professional curiosity of men who understood aircraft. And then he watched as a Luftwaffe officer arrived, Hauptmann insignia, an officer important enough that the Wehrmacht soldiers straightened and saluted. Tom was too far away to see the officer's face, too far to know that he was watching Kurt Richter, the pilot who had spared his life, arrive to investigate the crash of the bomber he had helped destroy. Kurt stepped out of the staff car and immediately felt wrong about this assignment. Investigating crashed bombers was routine work, something intelligence officers did to understand enemy tactics and equipment. But this particular bomber was different. This was the aircraft he had let live, the pilot he had chosen not to kill. And now Kurt had to walk through its wreckage like a scavenger picking over bones. The Wehrmacht sergeant saluted. Hauptmann Richter, the aircraft is mostly intact. We found crew identification documents. The pilot is listed as Lieutenant Thomas Brennan, Cleveland, Ohio. Kurt wrote the name in his notebook. Thomas Brennan, the man whose life he had saved. Has the pilot been captured? Not yet. Search parties are still looking. He bailed out 20 miles from here. Could be anywhere. Kurt nodded. Could be dead in the forest. Could be evading. Could be captured by now and not yet processed. The fog of war obscured everything. He walked to the nose section, climbed carefully through the shattered plexiglass. The cockpit was a disaster. Blood on the controls, frozen now in the October cold. Instrument panels smashed, but the basic structure remained. And there, wedged between the throttle quadrant and the side panel, Kurt found a photograph. He pulled it free carefully. The image was water-stained but clear. A young woman, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair and a bright smile. In her arms, she held an infant, maybe 3 or 4 months old, dressed in white. On the back, in careful handwriting, someone had written, "Come home to us, Sarah and Margaret, October 1943. Kurt stared at the photograph for a long time. The date was 1 week ago. This picture had been taken 1 week before Lieutenant Thomas Brennan climbed into this bomber and flew into German airspace and was shot down and bailed out with a tangled parachute. This woman, Sarah, was waiting for him. This baby, Margaret, was growing up without knowing whether her father was alive or dead. They were waiting for a man who might never come home. Waiting because Kurt had shot this aircraft down. Waiting because war made widows and orphans with industrial efficiency. But also waiting because Kurt had chosen not to pull the trigger. Had chosen to let Thomas Brennan fight for his life instead of ending it cleanly. Kurt looked at the photograph and thought of Anna. His sister had been the same age as Sarah when she died, had wanted the same things, a family, a future, life beyond war. He pocketed the photograph. The Wehrmacht sergeant raised an eyebrow. Evidence, Hauptmann? Yes, Kurt lied, for intelligence purposes. He couldn't explain why he was taking it, couldn't explain the impulse that made him want to preserve this small piece of Lieutenant Thomas Brennan's life. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe the need to believe that somewhere in this war, someone would survive intact enough to return home to photographs and wives and babies. Kurt completed his inspection, filed his report, and returned to his base. That night, lying in his bunk, he took out the photograph and studied it by flashlight. Sarah's smile, Margaret's tiny face. He thought about Thomas Brennan, somewhere in the German countryside, wounded and hunted, and trying desperately to get back to this. For the first time since Anna's death, Kurt questioned what he was doing. Questioned whether killing Allied airmen actually protected Germany or just perpetuated a cycle of violence that had no end. Questioned whether 47 victories made him a hero or just a very efficient killer. He had no answers. Only the photograph and the memory of a pilot fighting a tangled parachute and the decision inexplicable and irreversible to let that pilot live. Tom's luck ran out on day 4. He had crossed a stream, the water ice cold and waist deep. The current was stronger than expected. He lost his footing, went under, came up gasping. His flight suit was soaked. The October air temperature was 40 degrees. He had minutes before hypothermia set in. Tom pulled himself onto the far bank and tried to keep moving. Tried to generate heat through motion. But his body was shutting down. The broken ribs, the sprained ankle, 3 days without real food or rest, and now the shock of cold water. It was too much. He made it 50 yards before collapsing. The Wehrmacht patrol found him at dawn, shivering uncontrollably, barely conscious. A young soldier, maybe 18, stood over Tom with his rifle raised. For a moment, Tom thought he would be shot. Easier that way, cleaner. No long imprisonment, no uncertainty. But the soldier lowered his rifle and called for his sergeant. The sergeant was older, maybe 40, with the weathered face of a career soldier. He knelt beside Tom, checked his pulse, assessed his condition with professional competence. "Amerikanischer pilot?" the sergeant asked. Tom nodded, could barely speak through chattering teeth. "I surrender. Ich ergebe mich." The sergeant said something to his men in German. 2 soldiers lifted Tom, carefully supporting his weight. They wrapped him in a wool blanket from their truck. One offered a canteen of water. Tom drank the liquid, feeling like fire in his throat. "You are prisoner now," the sergeant said in heavily accented English. "War is over for you. You will be treated correctly." Tom wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Treated correctly. He had spent 4 days running for his life through German forests, had been shot down by German fighters, had watched friends die in German flak. And now the Germans wanted him to believe they would treat him correctly. But as they loaded him into the truck, as the young soldier shared a cigarette with him, even though Tom didn't smoke, as the sergeant issued orders to take him to a medical station, first, Tom began to understand something unexpected. These weren't monsters. They were soldiers. Tired men doing a job they probably hated. Men who would rather be home with their own families than hunting shot-down pilots through autumn forests. The truck drove through the German countryside. Tom watched through the canvas cover as they passed bombed cities and cratered fields, saw the damage Allied bombers had done, saw the cost of the war he was fighting. It looked remarkably similar to photographs he had seen of bombed English cities. Destruction was destruction, regardless of which side caused it. They took him to a Luftwaffe interrogation center, a concrete building functional and cold. He was processed with bureaucratic efficiency, name, rank, serial number, medical examination. His ribs were taped, his ankle wrapped in proper bandages. They gave him dry clothes, gave him soup that was mostly water but was warm and tasted better than anything he had eaten in 4 days. Then they put him in a cell. Concrete walls, a single barred window, a cot with a thin blanket, cold but not freezing, harsh but not torture. Tom lay on the cot and closed his eyes. He was alive. He was captured. He was a prisoner of war. Sarah would get a telegram. Missing in action, now prisoner of war. She would wait, would raise Margaret alone, would live with uncertainty for however long this war lasted. Tom touched his breast pocket. The photograph was still there, soggy but intact. He pulled it out, laid it carefully on the concrete floor to dry. Sarah and Margaret smiled up at him from the photograph. "Come home to us." Tom closed his eyes and promised he would, somehow, eventually. He would survive this, would survive imprisonment, would make it home, would meet his daughter. He had survived 4 days behind enemy lines, had survived a German fighter who chose mercy over duty, had survived when so many others didn't. He could survive this too. Kurt arrived at the interrogation center 3 days after Tom's capture. His orders were routine: review tactical intelligence from recent captures, interview pilots if possible, compile reports on American bomber tactics and formations. But when Kurt saw the name on the capture list, his heart stopped. Lieutenant Thomas J. Brennan, pilot, B-17F, captured October 17, 1943. The pilot he had spared. The owner of the photograph, Kurt still carried in his pocket. The man with a wife named Sarah and a daughter named Margaret. He was here. He was alive. He had survived the bailout, had survived the landing, had survived 4 days in German forests. Kurt had saved his life, and somehow impossibly that life had continued. Kurt requested to observe the interrogation. sat behind one-way glass and watched as Thomas Brennan was brought into the room. The American looked terrible, thin, bruised, moving carefully because of his taped ribs, but alive, conscious, defiant in the way that suggested his spirit hadn't been broken by capture. The intelligence officer asked standard questions. Squadron composition, bombing tactics, target selection. Thomas Brennan gave standard answers. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. He had been trained well. He wouldn't break easily. Kurt studied the American pilot's face. Young, maybe 23 or 24. The same age Kurt had been when the war started. He had the look of a mechanic, someone who worked with his hands, who understood machines. They were not so different, Kurt realized. Two men who had built things before the war taught them to destroy. The interrogation ended with nothing useful learned. The intelligence officer dismissed Thomas Brennan back to his cell. Kurt watched him go, watched him limp slightly on the sprained ankle, watched him press one hand to his ribs as he walked. That night, Kurt couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the photograph, about Sarah and Margaret waiting in Cleveland, Ohio, about Thomas Brennan in a concrete cell, wondering if he would ever see them again. On impulse, Kurt went to the guard station, spoke to the Feldwebel in charge. The American pilot captured 3 days ago, Lieutenant Brennan. Yes, Hauptmann. Tomorrow morning with his ration, provide him with real coffee, not ersatz, real coffee, and an extra portion of bread. The Feldwebel looked puzzled. Sir, he fought well, he earned it. Kurt couldn't explain his reasoning better than that. Couldn't say that he had spared this man's life and now felt responsible for ensuring that life continued with some measure of dignity. Couldn't say that the photograph in his pocket made him see Thomas Brennan not as an enemy, but as a husband and father who deserved to survive. The next morning, a guard brought Tom his daily ration. Black bread and watery soup, standard prisoner fare. But today there was something extra. A tin cup containing actual coffee. Not the roasted acorn substitute the Germans called ersatz coffee. Real coffee, strong and aromatic, the smell alone worth its weight in gold. From Hauptmann Richter, the guard said in broken English. He says you earned it. Tom stared at the cup. Didn't know who Hauptmann Richter was. Didn't understand why a German officer would give a prisoner real coffee, which was scarce even for German civilians. But he drank it slowly, savoring each sip, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. Tasted America in that coffee. Tasted home. Tasted a small gesture of humanity in the middle of inhumanity. He didn't know that the officer who sent the coffee was the pilot who had spared his life. Didn't know that Hauptmann Kurt Richter carried Sarah and Margaret's photograph in his pocket. Didn't know that his survival was due to one man's inexplicable decision to show mercy. But he tasted kindness in that coffee, and it gave him strength to survive what came next. Tom was transferred to Stalag Luft III in late November, a permanent prisoner of war camp for Air Force officers in Silesia, eastern Germany. The train ride took 2 days, packed into cattle cars with 40 other prisoners. Cold, hungry, uncertain, but alive. The camp was harsh but organized. Barbed wire fences, guard towers, roll calls twice daily in freezing cold, food that was barely adequate, bunks that were overcrowded. But the Geneva Convention was mostly followed. No torture, no executions, just the slow grinding misery of imprisonment. Tom shared a room with 15 other shot-down pilots. They formed a community of survival, shared Red Cross parcels when they arrived, played cards with decks made from cardboard, organized classes to pass time, English literature, mathematics, engine mechanics, which Tom taught because it reminded him of who he had been before the war. In December, a letter from Sarah reached him, the first communication since his capture. Tom read it alone, sitting on his bunk, while others gave him privacy. Dearest Tom, we received word you're alive. Prisoner, but alive. Margaret is walking now. She takes 3 steps and falls into my arms every time. I tell her about her brave daddy every night. She points at your photograph and says, Dada, we're waiting for you. However long it takes, come home to us. All my love, Sarah. Tom read the letter 10 times, 20, memorized every word, folded it carefully and kept it in the breast pocket where the photograph used to be. The photograph had been confiscated during processing, along with his escape kit and personal effects. But the words remained. Come home to us. He would. Somehow, he would survive this and go home. Meanwhile, 400 miles away, Kurt Richter fought a losing battle against the tide of war. The Luftwaffe was dying, slowly at first, then with accelerating speed. Fuel shortages meant reduced training for new pilots. Those pilots died quickly when they faced combat-hardened Americans. Experienced pilots like Kurt flew mission after mission, exhaustion accumulating, nerves fraying. And then in January of 1944, everything changed. The P-51 Mustang arrived in numbers. Kurt saw his first Mustang on a mission in late January. The American fighter appeared at 28,000 feet, escorting bombers that had just bombed Munich. The Mustang was beautiful in the way that good engineering always is. Clean lines, efficient design, and range. Incredible range. It could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The tactical implications were immediate and catastrophic. German fighters could no longer hunt bombers without escort, could no longer refuel and attack again. The Mustangs were faster, more maneuverable at altitude, and flown by pilots who were getting better with each mission, while German pilots got worse. Kurt's squadron, which had numbered 24 aircraft in October, was down to 11 by February. The missing 13 aircraft represented 13 pilots, some dead, some wounded, some simply broken by the stress and transferred to ground duties. Kurt flew on, flew because orders said to fly, flew because Germany needed every pilot, flew because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant confronting the reality that everything he had fought for was collapsing. In late February, Operation Argument began. The Americans called it Big Week. 6 days of maximum effort bombing raids against German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe threw everything it had at the bombers, and the Mustangs slaughtered them. Kurt flew 4 missions in 5 days. On the 5th mission, February 24th, his luck ran out. The target was a bomber formation near Leipzig. Kurt's squadron intercepted at 25,000 feet. But the Mustangs were waiting, dozens of them. They dove on the German fighters like hawks on mice. Kurt made one firing pass at a B-17, his cannons hitting the bomber's wing, causing damage, but not a kill. Then the Mustangs were on him. He broke hard right, pulling 6G's, vision narrowing. A Mustang followed, matching every move. The American pilot was good, better than good, expert. Tracer rounds walked across Kurt's engine, cowling. His windscreen shattered. Oil pressure dropped. Engine temperature spiked. Fire warning light illuminated. Kurt's Messerschmitt was dying. He fought the controls as smoke filled the cockpit, fought to maintain altitude, failed. The engine seized. The propeller froze. The aircraft became a glider, a 30-ton piece of metal with no power and diminishing options. Kurt unstrapped, kicked the canopy release. The canopy tore away in the slipstream. He pushed the stick forward, throwing himself clear, tumbling through the freezing air at 20,000 feet. His hand found the ripcord. Pulled. The parachute deployed with brutal deceleration. Kurt hung in the harness, watching his Messerschmitt spiral away toward the earth, trailing smoke, a funeral pyre for the aircraft that had kept him alive for 18 months. He landed in a field near the French border, territory that had changed hands multiple times. He didn't know if he was landing in German-held or Allied-held ground. Didn't know if he would be rescued or captured. American infantry appeared within minutes. Soldiers in olive drab uniforms, their rifles raised, their expressions wary. Kurt raised his hands. I surrender. Ich ergebe mich. The same words Thomas Brennan had spoken 4 months earlier. The same admission of defeat. The same transition from warrior to prisoner. An American medic treated his burns, gave him water, gave him a cigarette. The medic was professional, almost kind. Not cruel, not vindictive, just a man doing his job. War's over for you, buddy, the medic said. Kurt nodded. The medic was right. His war was over. But another kind of war, an internal war, was just beginning. Because Kurt Richter, Luftwaffe fighter ace, was about to become a prisoner in Allied hands. Was about to experience what Thomas Brennan had experienced. Was about to learn what the other side of mercy looked like. And in his pocket, stained with sweat and worn from months of handling, was still the photograph. Sarah and Margaret smiling from Cleveland, Ohio, waiting for a pilot who was now a prisoner, waiting because Kurt had chosen once to let him live.